Drake slowly came to, head foggy, mouth dry, and feeling like someone had taken a blowtorch to his back. He groaned, opening his eyes to stare at the stark white ceiling of the medbay above. The last he remembered, he'd been shielding Remen from a full-strength plasma volley. After that, it was foggy. Drake slowly sat up, his back complaining the entire way. Leaning against the head of the metal bed frame, he heard the distinctive click of metal-on-metal contact. Drake slowly reached a hand over his shoulder, touching between his shoulder blades. A shock ran through his body as he felt the ridges of metal where his spine used to be. He pulled his hand back, staring frightfully down at where his toes stuck out beneath the blanket. Preparing for the worst, he tried to wiggle his toes. To his immense relief, his lower digits responded immediately, wiggling whichever way he willed them to. A voice from the corner of the room nearly made him leap from the bed.
Your chest plate had fused to your spinal column and nearly burnt away your spinal cord in its entirety. Luckily for you, your brainstem was still intact. I was able to remove your spine and replace it with a cybernetic alternative. It doesn't bring as many benefits as, say, a cybernetic arm or leg, but it should prevent you from breaking your back from a bad fall.
Drake stared at the bandaged, terribly thin Geknosian woman in the corner. Already on high alert, the woman raised her clawed hands in surrender before continuing to speak.
You need to be careful while it heals. You can move around and even lightly exercise, but don't overdo it, or you might end up paralyzed from the skull down. Trust me, that is not a fun way to spend the night.
Blinking a few times, Drake took a deep breath in, trying to calm the fire that had swelled in his chest on seeing the Geknosian. Looking around, he realized the medbay looked a lot fancier than when he'd last been admitted. Looking around at the familiar and yet foreign room, he asked, also noting the other beds were empty.
Where are we? Where's the others?
He glanced back at the woman, who arched a scaly eyebrow before making an, "oh yeah," face.
Oh, we're in the Merchants District. Currently, you're in the late quarter of the Decadence Mansion. I helped Kaz move everyone out of the bunker and over here a week or two ago after the others woke up. By the by, that silent fellow really likes popping up out of nowhere now. Be ready for that.
Drake furrowed his brows.
You mean Kaz? Motherfucking mercy!
Drake just about leapt out of his skin as Cassius popped into existence at the foot of his bed, his skin an ashen gray color beneath its pinkish hue. Slowly, Drake put down the arm he'd brought up to defend himself, as Cassius waved, a disembodied, overtly cheery female voice chiming.
It's good to have you back, boss!
Drake pointed at Cassius, more confused than ever.
How are you talking right now?
Cassius grinned and tapped a small lump in his throat. Drake watched the lump quiver slightly as the cheery feminine voice replied.
Martha set me up with a hands-free upgrade!
Drake glanced over at the Geknosian in the corner, who pointed at themselves before simply saying,
Martha.
Drake nodded and rubbed his face with his hands, pressing on his eyes until he saw stars. He swore he could feel a headache coming on.
All right. I need some coffee.
Then you all are going to tell me what's happened while I was out cold. Drake sunk into the plush, velvet, upholstered sofa in the merchant's smoking room. It was an odd feeling sitting in something comfortable, plush, and warm as the sofa, when all his life he had been lucky to sit in a hardwood chair for his evening meal. Drake shifted in the padding, trying to let himself relax into it, but he couldn't relax in the expensive, brightly colored, and richly decorated furniture. Sighing frustratedly, he shoved himself off the sofa and sat on one of the several low wooden tables that dotted the room. Reaching between his legs, he curiously opened one of the table's small drawers. Inside was a laser pistol, an ornate box, a golden rectangle with a hinge and a magazine, with a scantily clad and absurdly large-breasted Geknosian woman in a lewd pose. He heard the door open behind him and looked back, seeing no one there. He shrugged and dragged the magazine out of the drawer and flipped it open. He quickly closed it after seeing the extensive body modifications the models inside had. He tossed it to the side, cover down, and grabbed the ornate box. Flipping the lid open, he found a neat layer of brownish-green tubes, with a fluffy green substance poking from one end. They smelled floral and slightly like rotten eggs. It was an oddly attractive smell. He went to pick one out when he spotted the magazine lifting itself off the floor and flick itself open before being thrown across the room. Drake just stared at the empty air with an expression of disapproval. "Cassius, I know you're there. Well, I do now, at least. You can uncloak." The air vibrated and distorted before Cassius popped into view with a sheepish grin, his voice module quivering to life. "Hi, boss. Fancy meeting you here, right?" Drake chuckled and selected one of the cigars, chomping down on the squarish end before picking up the laser pistol, firing a short pulse to light the end of the cigar. Taking a long draw, Drake coughed and quickly tugged the cigar from his mouth. Holding it to the side as he pounded the tickle out of his lungs, he looked back up at Cassius. "Just saying, I don't mind you walking around while you're invisible, but you're liable to get punched by someone. Do me a favor and bring the others here. We need to get back into the groove." Cassius nodded, the air vibrating around him as he disappeared. A few seconds later, the door seemed to close of its own volition. Drake took another puff of the cigar while he waited, getting accustomed to the tickling feeling in his lungs. After a while of puffing the cigar, he realized, suddenly, that he wasn't alone. Drake lifted his head, staring at the shadow in the corner. It was flat, not projected onto any surface, but rather stood like it was a physical manifestation. It wore a tall, wide-brimmed hat, and leaned on a cane, staring back. Drake didn't know for how long he'd been staring when the figure finally moved. The figure simply looked at their wrist, looked back at him, tipped their hat, and disappeared as he blinked. He looked suspiciously down at the cigar in his hand, and slowly put it out in a glass ashtray. Drake looked up as the door opened with a clunk, a soft frown coming to his face. Destrier stepped in first, leading with a bulky metal leg that hissed and clicked with each step, his previously missing eye replaced by one of a stark, frosty blue that contrasted heavily with his tired-looking natural brown eye. He took a seat in the plush sofa next to Drake. Remen was next, sleek Durasteel replacing his arms from the elbow down. He cracked a grin, revealing metal teeth as he pulled a cigarette from between his lips and quipped, "Looking good, boss man," before plopping down next to Destrier. Kaz was last, a new scar pale against her cheek as she strolled, cat-like, into the room, her shoulder-length dark hair barely swaying with each step. She gave Drake a light smile as she took a seat in a high-backed padded chair near the fire and crossed her legs. Cassius faded into existence, sitting with his legs crisscrossed on top of a green felt-top table, winking at Drake cheekily. Drake looked at all of them with newfound respect and appreciation. Slowly, he lowered his head and nodded. He still couldn't bring himself to smile back at them, as he asked, "Well, what's next?" There was a silence for a moment. Kaz was the first to speak, voice laden with determination. "What we've been doing since the start." Drake glanced up as she finished making eye contact with the others. Almost simultaneously, they looked at him and stated, "We fight!" Drake felt a small smile come to his face as Cassius chimed in. "Like we've never fought before."